Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm honored to present you with an extraordinarily special installment in my series of Community Spotlight videos. I recently had the opportunity to sit down and interview our Conquest LCG lead designer, Brad Andrees. We discuss various aspects of game design, the concept of balance in Conquest, and touch upon the concept of the rotation system. We talk about the process of developing Conquest as a whole, and he provides a wealth of insight and wisdom. So, if you enjoy this video, remember to hit the like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're encouraged to share, because the more engagement this video receives, the more viewers are reached, and ever the broader you help grow our Conquest community. But with our introduction aside, I'm honored to bring you an interview with Fantasy Flight Games Associate LCG designer, our very own Brad Andrees. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before we begin our very special interview, why don't you please introduce yourself and let our viewers know a little about how you contribute to the Conquest community.
Hey Warhammer Conquest players, it's Brad Andrees, lead developer for Warhammer Conquest. I'd say my biggest contribution for Conquest right now is kind of the guiding force behind the game. Designing new sets, new products that are going to be in your hands in the future, and also as well, I am head of directing our FAQs, any rulings on cards. I've been called the God Emperor of Mankind for Conquest before, and well, I'm not gonna blasphemy that hard, but yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Definitely. Well, I mean, it's an absolute honor to have you on. I have to say, I think it's fair that you contribute more than most to our community. So, God Emperor of Mankind, it's a fitting title, whether entirely accurate or not. But you've been on a host of other podcasts. I really appreciate your willingness to kind of put yourself out there and be a presence in the community. Just relative to some other developers I've personally known, I wouldn't exactly describe you as shy. So it's just very nice that it's very much a human being behind the reins of Conquest here. I suppose just to kind of start our interview, Conquest is clearly an immensely complicated game. There's tons of variables going on. There's just an immense amount of strategic depth. And as a way of kicking off our interview, I guess I'd love to hear about you kind of discuss some of your design space for the game. Like, what are some of those different aspects that you get to kind of tinker around and experiment with? And which of those do you enjoy manipulating the most?
Well, when we started design on Conquest with Eric Lang and Nate French, one of our key goals was really trying to play up that almost half Euro game style of I'm gaining resources and I'm playing for the future. That's the command struggle, essentially.
Sure.
And then the very big box, beat 'em up, dudes on a map, punch, punch, punch kind of feel that both the Warhammer tabletop game and a lot of big box games have in the board game community. And so we tried to really merge those two ideas together, and especially what was important, the idea of playing into the future. It was a whole military campaign that you could see. So really a lot of the coolest design space in Conquest focuses on that idea of I'm setting up for a battle. You might be able to see kind of what I'm doing, but not quite yet.
Right. Well, I mean, definitely kind of looking ahead to the future. I understand you can't really reveal anything about future product, but our upcoming Planetfall cycle has a lot to do with the planet type icons, so strong point, technology, material, all of these things are going to play a much more prominent and, game influencing role than ever before. But sticking to a strictly broad sense, what kind of other exciting interactions might we someday expect?
Well, there's a lot of toggleable bits in Conquest. Obviously the planet icons were ripe to expand upon. They don't have, too much inherent flavor, but a little bit. And I really wanted to push those because I'm a big proponent of flavor in the game, and I try and jam in as much as I possibly can. Doesn't always work, but we try. Um, so obviously they were ripe for a spot for us to begin. We've seeded stuff with both the elite and ally trait. I wouldn't be surprised to see us do something with that at some point.
Right.
There is definitely a lot we could do more with shield icons. Let's see what else. Right off the top of my head, we could certainly do a lot with some of the traits that we've been seeding, and do some more tribal mechanics. So we're seeding lots of little bits here and there just to really get stuff going and give our future selves tools that they can play with.
Sure. I mean, just personally, I've been absolutely delighted by seeing the rise of specializations. So the, recently released Tyranid box, we happen to see the introduction of Hive Mind, and looking ahead at some of our Planetfall spoilers, we've seen things like Go's Fasta, and our Chaplain Mavros happens to have a specialization associated with him, and just whether it's some expansion on existing aspects of cards or whether it's just the introduction of new mechanics, I just never cease to be absolutely delighted by these little tiny twists and spins on material to make it feel so fresh and so exciting. I just can't help but feel, just absolutely enamored with this game.
Well, specializations I'm particularly happy with. It allows us to add almost keywords, ideas that don't really have a rule set that's coded into them.
Right.
They have all their rules text right there on the card, and that makes them way easier for players to comprehend and use and interact with.
Sure. And I mean, it seems it's like, so long as it sticks to one triggering condition, like the Hive Mind specialization, if there's a Termagant token present at that planet, all sorts of other effects, so long as one kind of condition is met, like a Bloodthirst on Rograk's Bloodhand, once a unit dies, he gains some special effect, assuming that all future units with Bloodthirst or something like that will kind of follow that same theme. It just seems like an absolutely fantastic thing. It just seems like it opens up this tremendous wealth of design space. And I mean, it's got to be difficult for you in talking about the game, just because a few minutes into our interview, it's already kind of skirting the line between, are we getting into like dangerous discussion territory?
No, everything here is fine. But yeah, that is the intent with all the specializations, is that first part there, triggering condition, or that is always set, or whatever their condition. For example, Hive Mind, the Termagant tokens, that's always going to be there, and that's coded in their DNA.
Right. So I just kind of see them as much more flexible, much more interesting keywords. But, at the time of this interview today, Brad, Conquest is almost an entire year old, and I think in a lot of ways it's come a long way from the days of just the core set. But all the same, despite having seen our first deluxe expansion officially released, we aren't necessarily too far from where the game just started. And as I'm sure you can empathize with, hopefully Conquest has a very long lifespan ahead of it. We've seen our first, 6 war packs. We've seen spoilers for Planetfall. I guess at this point, what are some lessons that you've learned? Like, what are just some rules of thumb, maybe, that you're keeping in mind going forward, now that you've got a little bit of history of Conquest design behind you?
Well, we learned a lot from the Warlord cycle. Warlord cycle in particular was designed, play-tested, and developed shortly after the core set was finished. And so we were almost completely done by the time the core set released.
Right.
And so we were working on the Great Devourer at that point. And so we didn't even have any idea how the community was going to take apart and break the core set when we designed the Warlord cycle. So I had this much better sense of what the community thinks is good, what they're playing, and what they enjoy playing. So that's definitely going to inform my design going forward. We've seen, I've talked about this on another podcast, but I was very conservative with any of the resource acceleration and shenanigans in the core set, just because we had had some really bad experiences in Invasion.
Sure.
With warpstone excavation in particular, just being a little too prevalent and just pervasive in the community, and it really kind of hurt that game early on. And I didn't want that to happen to Conquest, so we were very, very conservative. And I think we, moving forward, can start to be a little less conservative and a little bit more inclusive of a little bit of resource acceleration, try and push the cost curve a little higher up. Yeah, I think those are the biggest lessons I've learned over the last year now, and really exciting stuff coming up. I wish I could tell you about it, but...
Right. Your hands are essentially tied. But as you touch on not wanting to, come out the gate with things being too ridiculous, as a player, I and the rest of the community learned very early on that Fantasy Flight has intended for this game to be part of a rotation cycle. So new sets are going to be released. Our oldest expansion content is essentially going to rotate out. It's no longer going to be eligible for tournament play, but things like the core set are always going to be there. So it definitely makes sense in my mind that you wouldn't want some insane power cards there. I suppose our community has kind of identified specific cards that they consider to be extraordinarily powerful, if not at times unfairly so. But can you tell us a little bit about what being on a rotation cycle means in regard to, like, development and design opportunities?
Well, in terms of development and design opportunities, rotation is wonderful. It lets us be more experimental, and that's just what we did with the Warlord cycle. And there's stuff all over there, peppered here and there, to try and test different little bits and see how the community reacts to something. Core set we had to be very careful with. But that first cycle, we start to get to experiment and try stuff. And knowing that at some point, any of the mistakes we made there will go away, and anything we really liked, we can reprint. We can bring that forward. So if we really like... Say, what's your favorite card from Warlord Cycle?
Oh, God. Let's just say the Klavex War Leader.
So say we felt like the Klavex War Leader was the best card in there and we wanted players to have it in their hands. I'm not saying it is.
Sure.
But if we wanted to reprint it, we could. If we didn't want to reprint it, we can let it rotate out. If we felt that the Warlord groupies were really good for the environment, we could let those continue to be in the environment. They just get reprinted right after they rotate.
Right.
And it gives us that experimentation. It's something we wouldn't have before. It's something that we would be afraid of in, say, old Game of Thrones, where no rotation. So if we print a card that breaks the game for a little bit, changes how players play, we can never come back. We have to ban the card or restrict it or do something like that.
Exactly.
We're not going to have to do that as much in Conquest. I hope we won't have to, but again, I can't promise because I'm going to keep experimenting and trying crazy stuff.
Sure, and I mean, it just seems to me like it has to be such a struggle between you want to make, fun, engaging, interesting, and compelling cards that players enjoy playing, they get entertainment value out of them, and at the same time, kind of the more reeled in and sterile and boring a card is, probably the safer it might be for the overall balance of the game. So it just seems like it must be such a struggle to mix fun with balance.
Yeah, no, you really want to ride that line, because that's where the exciting gameplay is. The most exciting moment for a player is, one, either seeing that card that's right on the line pop off the top of their deck and be like, yes, I get to play this.
Right.
Or when they look at a spoiler article and they get so excited for that card to exist and they're like, I can't believe they could print that.
I mean, exactly. I don't think it makes for a very memorable gameplay experience to be like, and I attacked him with my 2-attack guy, and I killed his 2-hit point guy. Oh man, it was just crazy.
Bonkers!
I suppose just because we happen to touch specifically on the Clavex War Leader, go figure that power card was at the forefront of my mind, just speaking specifically to the power of cards and just how potent card interactions can be, seeing as how you've had a little bit of learning opportunity from the Warlord cycle, is there anything in particular you keep in mind when you sit down to design future sets, like regarding power curve, regarding balance?
For me, obviously we want to keep it on the line of, excitement. There's definitely a lot of cards that I design and I put out there, and they're not for that tournament player. They're not for that top 5%. And we all have to understand that those non-tournament players make up a huge portion of our audience. And so we have to design some cards for them too. Cards that are flavorful, are just fun, are weird, and make people think. So I probably one of my guiding principles is we're not always designing cards just for the tournament players.
Right.
Obviously, we want to design some because they're great spokespeople for the game. They bring new players in, and we want to make them happy. So, it's balancing between the two groups is really important. Power level, yeah, we want to keep stuff exciting. We want to keep players engaged and interested in what the new content coming out is. For me, the most important thing, though, is what the game is doing. And I put that out there, and it's kind of vague. But before Planetfall, people won't care that much about what their win condition is. But when you pick up a Broderick War deck, it's going to be way different for you guys. It's so exciting. Going after green planets doesn't sound like, but wait till he's out and you guys are going to change your mind, because there's this different way you're looking at the game when you play with Planetfall cards that you didn't with your Warlord cards. And that's what's exciting, and that's what drives my design, is making players look at the game differently.
Sure. Just as I've started to break into commentating games, I can just only imagine it's going to be so much more exciting when I see a player that's running a card like the Corrupted Teleportarium, and then it's like, oh my god, the next planet is blue, and it's just going to have such a tremendous amount of influence on gameplay. And I think just kind of the planet flop is such a unique yet rich aspect of Conquest, where each and every game, it plays out similarly, but just the fact that the battlefield you're kind of contesting is always changing, always dynamic, somewhat unpredictable, it just adds so much more replayability and so much just possibility for excitement. So I think it's just yet another thing where between you and the rest of the designers, it was just a stroke of genius to bother including that in the game in the first place.
Was one of our founding principles. I remember Eric Lang coming in with some early prototype that had all these different symbols on a card that we didn't even know it was going to be a planet yet, and just yellow triangles, green stars, and blue circles. And we went through a lot of iterations, but we're really happy with where it ended up.
It sounds like you guys must have been eating a lot of Lucky Charms at that time or something. But I suppose just another thing I was curious about is in Conquest, we've thus far seen 8 different factions. It's been revealed that eventually the Necrons are going to be faction number 9, but each of them has unique options for allies. For instance, if I was building a Chaos deck, I could go pure Chaos, or I could ally with Orcs, or I could instead opt to pair with Dark Eldar, and of course I've got a wealth of different options regarding neutral cards. So I suppose to complicate things even further, each and every faction has multiple warlord options, and in Planetfall, we're going to end up seeing a total of 3 options for each faction. So I suppose in considering all of those different options, how important is it in a deck building sense that players have like a diverse array of choices?
I mean, it's deck building, so choices are like number one on the list of what players are looking for, and solving that deck building puzzle is what drives a lot of interest and joy in deck building. Oh, how tuned can you get your Codiez build? Well, mine build is amazingly good against Dark Eldar, but your build is great against Orcs.
Right.
Again, I'm spitballing, but one of the key principles I use when I design a warlord is that we want to establish a play pattern,
Okay.
a way that a player goes about playing the game. And each one is designed to do that differently. When you look at a Kato deck and when you look at a Ragnar deck, they should include different things because they're doing different things. Not just because a card is overall the best. That's going to happen. Can't really help it. That's game design. But the cards that you bring in surrounding those cards, the ones that fill out and really flavor and bring your deck building alive, they're going to be different for every warlord. At least that's the goal.
Sure. Well, something I'm kind of wondering about is because we see factions that kind of follow a specific theme, like just how similar should warlords be within the same faction? Like, say, comparing, gosh, off the top of my head, say, Nozdreg and Old Zogwart. How much similarity should they share, and just how much diversity do you ideally want to see within the same faction?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Diversity in the faction, there's things that a faction are good at. For example, if you look at orcs, since we're talking about them, high HP is a common trait. You're going to see that a lot.
Right.
They get HP, they're the best at it. So you want that faction theming to carry through no matter what. However, coming back around to my original statement on the warlords, the play pattern, Zogwart goes about winning the game and just playing the game very differently than Nozdreg does. And that's the key. That if they go about it differently, they're going to feel different and they'll play differently. And letting players have those different options is the key behind it all. Because when they have those options, you can pick the one that's tailored best to the way you want to play.
Right.
I hope that answers your question.
I definitely think it does. And I mean, earlier you touched on as well, within a specific faction, within a specific warlord, you're also afforded additional opportunities to kind of fine-tune your deck to really nail down and focus on, certain aspects of those characters, of that warlord, of that signature squad that you probably enjoy the most or find most effective. Something I've just kind of been personally curious about is of all the different warlords and associated signature squads we've seen thus far, when you actually sit down to play a game of Conquest, which of those happens to suit your personal playstyle the best? Like, what kind of player are you?
So, it's probably Zarather. I mean, yes, I've talked about how he's my character from Black Crusade and whatnot, but his play style of throwing around damage and amping up damage and comboing damage, the little math game that you get to play with him.
Sure.
Of like, oh, it's actually 3 because it's not 2 damage and I'm ramping it up and Zarathar's here, so blah, 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 blah. Putting all those pieces together is very fun for me. So he's a math puzzle warlord, and it's very appealing, very simple puzzle, but I feel good every time I do it. So he's a lot of fun. Number 2, probably be Codiez.
Okay.
His, also another kind of damage puzzle warlord for him. So I'm very attracted to that idea of putting the pieces together and trying to make something out of nothing. Then probably coming in at number 3... I mean, I guess I go with Ragnar. He's just so much fun. The Warlord Hunt strategy is just a blast, and trying to guess where my opponent is going
Well,
just feels fun.
Definitely, and I think it's just funny that you mentioned Zarather as your favorite. It was actually being absolutely crushed by a Zarather deck that was, the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to committing me to, starting to pick up Conquest and really play the game. So I suppose that's I can totally understand the appeal there. Kind of as we look forward in our planetfall cycle and beyond, something that's really going to start becoming important, so far as we players have heard, is lore and story. And really, before I started playing Conquest, I collected the Warhammer, tabletop game. I was a burgeoning painter and hobbyist, and I always kind of hoped and dreamed that someday Fantasy Flight would, bestow their living card game license on 40K. But I suppose in looking ahead, in looking at what we've already seen, just how important is it that, theme and lore and fluff all be kind of incorporated into this game?
In my opinion, it's very, very important. If I could make every single card be as flavorful as possible, I would. It's a card game, though, and sometimes mechanics have to take over in order for it to be a card game. So when I have the opportunity to make something extremely fluffy and flavorful, I do. But it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you start in one spot, and then over iterations and iterations and iterations, the card changes into a different identity. I try and make it reflavor, but at that point, the die is cast, and what can you do? You make it fit the best you can.
Right.
So, we try really, really hard to make it as close as we can, but, can't always hit home runs, and sometimes I'm good with just a ground rule double.
Well, certainly. I suppose just in looking ahead and, understanding full well that you can't really give away any kind of future content, we've heard it mentioned that we're going to start receiving narrative inserts. So kind of there's going to be more of a narrative or a story going on amidst all the fighting and chaos and bloodshed of Conquest. I suppose, is there anything that you can share about what we might expect, just in regard to how story is going to become more prominent within this game?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So story is definitely going to be prominent about the game. We have the Traxxas sector to play around in. It's ours in terms of we can do what we like. So we want to have an overarching narrative, characters that might show up now and then get an arm cut off, and then when you see them later, they'll have a bionic arm.
Right.
And that sort of thing is something we could do. Somebody could be a good guy and then get turned to chaos. Now, good guy is not really appropriate, but
Sure.
they could be a guardsman and then be a chaos guardsman. Yeah. So we have a lot of narrative elements that we can use, and we're just seeding the ground now. We didn't feel it was entirely necessary in the Warlord cycle, just because we wanted to get it out quick, get it to players as soon as they could, and players were going to be excited just to have new cards. And, I think the players were, but we want to keep pushing what we can do and our boundaries. So, yeah, for the foreseeable future, I see story inserts.
Well, sure. I suppose just in the content we've already received, we've gotten a fair few canonical characters, like, Captain Cato Sicarius, of course, of the Ultramarines, but FFG, yourself, and the rest of the design team have also introduced a number of new characters, like Packmaster Kith, which, definitely sees a lot of play. I suppose, what kind of factors do you consider when you're designing new cards in regard to whether it should be something that's canonical, it's based on what already exists, or if it's something, brand new, something unique and novel to the game?
So, we try and do a mix. We try and bring those classic characters that people want to see, but we want to put them in new contexts, and the easiest way to do that is with new characters. It also lets us establish an identity for Conquest. Those new characters are Conquest exclusive. You're going to see them there, and we need to develop our own mythos along with it to get people excited and seeing those changes that could occur in characters. We can't exactly turn Kato to chaos. That's going to be a no-go.
Right.
But we could introduce a new Ultramarines captain that eventually turns to worship Khorne. That could be a thing we do. That's not out of the gates for us. So, we need both those pieces to really develop something rich that players will be able to be engrossed in and really have our own characters to grow that narrative.
Well, sure. And I suppose just changing topics ever so slightly from, story and plot and narrative to the nitty-gritty, tournament power gamer type topic. When you sit down and you take a look at Conquest from a design perspective, when you're building new cards, a lot of our players look at the existing warlords as kind of a numerical or statistical breakdown. They separate them into tiers or power rankings relative to one another. What kind of factors, what kind of considerations go into actually balancing the game? Like, how important is it to kind of stick to an idea that everything should be approximately equal regarding warlords, regarding faction, when it comes to, power or number of games won?
The big thing we try and do is, obviously we try and balance the game. But Conquest has given us a gift in having so many factions and how the alliance wheel works, because they allow us to build weaknesses into factions. And so, while Eldar might be good against a particular faction, there's definitely a faction that's good against Eldar. And so by having those checks in place, the meta can establish itself. And that's one of the beauties of Conquest, is that there are just so many different types of decks out there. And as we continue to bring out warlords and bring out new cards, new warlords will rise up and rise down, and the meta will shift in and out as cards rotate out. So the idea is, though, our balance is achieved by having those changes occur, and that players won't ever be stuck with the same meta for too long.
Right.
And so excitement continues to flow, new decks pop up, old decks drop down, then later old decks may pop back up as new cards are released. And so you're going to have these shifts and excitement. You come to a tournament and you don't know what people are playing. And then by the time you go to the next tournament, maybe it's a little more established. By the time you go to the tournament after that, people know what's going on. And by the tournament after that, all of a sudden, it's all fresh again.
Right. So it's just kind of more a balance over time thing where maybe, at the present moment, Kith is out there winning a lot of tournaments, but maybe half a year down the line, all of a sudden she could be, for all I know, ranking near the bottom. So it just seems like a very interesting kind of natural rise and fall of things, kind of like a wave, going in and out.
Exactly. And the idea is, if Kith is really good today, you could go to a tournament and expect Kith. But the idea is that there is a deck out there that will do really well against Kith. And so if you're expecting a lot of Kith, you bring that deck. You'll do well that day. And so lets the community takes the balance into their own hands.
Well, definitely. Another kind of question that I was always wondering about personally is, as of the last couple years now, Games Workshop has kind of pulled in the reins a little bit on a lot of far ahead of time announcements of new products. So they kind of announce something, and then very shortly thereafter it ends up in stores for people to, ogle and purchase. I suppose, let's say Games Workshop were to announce a new Tyranid model available tomorrow. How long might it be before we ultimately see like a Conquest card version? What kind of, time frame might it take to design a card and refine it before it's, finally made available for public release?
Well, Games Workshop does talk to us ahead of time. I can't really speak too much to that.
Sure.
But, the development process for Conquest is pretty long. So products I was working on 8-9 months ago. I mean, I don't even have an inkling of when they could get into your guys' hands.
Right.
Like, it can really, really vary depending on lots of factors. So generally, when new stuff comes out, we try and get it out there because it's exciting and new. We try and get it out to the fans as much as we can when we can fit it. But say they come out with a new Tyranid model today. They announced it today. And I only knew about it a week ago because I don't know. They can really vary on when they tell us about things.
Sure.
That's okay. That's their purview, and they're right. But as soon as we know, it might take 6 months till I'm starting a new cycle, and that'd be the only spot for this particular card to go. But if the theme of the cycle doesn't fit it, it might be another 2 years before we see that unit.
Right.
So it can vary so much.
Yeah, I suppose it's always kind of tricky to think of the development of cycles as batches of cards, just because, once things are all up and running and the product is releasing smoothly, if we see like a monthly expansion, it just is a little bit abstract to think, okay, I'm getting something new once a month, but at the same time, this is only being designed, maybe as one big set a couple times a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can really vary when it gets to you guys. With some things new and exciting, I usually right there on GW's page ogling it as well. And if it's really exciting, I try and get it out as soon as we can. But it can really vary.
Sure. Well, kind of as our interview, regrettably winds down to a close, I don't want to take up too much of your time that I'm sure you would spend, developing cards all night and day. God forbid you spend any time having fun or being with your family. But something I found so amusing when I first heard about it, like you mentioned earlier tonight, was that Zarather was named after one of your characters in a role-playing game, a 40k themed role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, recently, thanks to the wonderful Twitter, you shared that Subject Omega X 62113 was named after the date of your wedding. Are there any other kind of Conquest Easter eggs or cards or mechanics that you can think of that have some kind of hidden, game irrelevant, but still very kind of cute, very funny meaning?
Well, there's a couple hidden things out there. I'd mentioned to another podcast that Broderick War is actually hidden in the rules reference guide.
Right.
So we had come up with the idea for his character pretty early on. There are a couple hidden Easter eggs out there coming up. Maybe you'll just have to have me back on and I can talk about them.
I'll have to hold you to that, I suppose. Just as a means of, drawing this interview to a close, though, as tragic as it is to ultimately say goodbye, I suppose, was there anything else you were wanting to get off your chest or anything you'd like to share with our community at large?
Well, I get a lot of questions about Conquest all the time. The rules feedback on the webpage feeds right into my email, so I hear all your guys' questions and I answer them as quickly as I can. But no one ever asked me about the rickety War Buggy.
Well, Brad, I think there's no better opportunity than the present. What exactly is the rickety War Buggy?
Well, the rickety War Buggy is just the coolest unit from the Planetfall cycle, and it's going to be in the first War Pack.
Well, I have to admit I'm very flattered that you decided to share this with me. The Rickety War Buggy is a 1-cost Orc Army unit. It happens to have a loyal icon. It has 3 attack, 1 hit point. It has the vehicle trait and reads no war gear attachments. It has the Goes Fasta specialization and reads while your opponent has the initiative, this unit cannot be dealt damage by units while you control an army unit at this planet not named Rickety War Buggy. So I always thought that the orcs needed an honored librarian of their own, and now they've finally got one, so...
He is shenanigans. That's the best thing I can say about him. He gets in, does damage, your opponent wants to shoot him, but they can't. But there's ways to play around him. that's why his text is as it is. I can see Zarather having a little easier time against him than, say, Kith.
Well, most definitely. And now I understand how it is. You design cards that make your own personal favorite warlord the most powerful. That's very devious of you.
But of course.
But I suppose before we ultimately draw things to a close, Brad, anything else you'd like to toss out there? Anything else you'd like to say? Any shout-outs you'd like to give?
Well, I just want to thank the community for being so patient with the Great Devourer. I know it was a long wait, but you guys toughed it out, and I want to do the best I can to make sure that content keeps rolling forward.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's all too easy to kind of lose sight that Fantasy Flight Games is just one smaller company than a lot of people give it credit for. It's not this gigantic mega corporation that has thousands upon thousands of employees, and I'm sure it's not a, personal act of cruelty that you've been depriving all of us of the Tyranids for so long, so...
No, I wish it would have been out in your guys' hands the moment everyone got it in Gen Con.
Definitely. Well...
Just want you guys to have it and play it and enjoy it, because I had a lot of fun making it, so...
Definitely. So thank you so much for joining me for this interview, Brad, and have an absolutely fantastic evening.
I hope to.
Well, with our interview having drawn to a close, I'll just end this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and I very much hope you enjoyed this indescribably special interview. Please leave a comment sharing your own thoughts and opinion regarding this interview, keeping ever in mind that our dear developer couldn't share everything he surely wanted to say. But in any case, and as always, it's not just opportunities like this one, but also interacting on a daily basis with viewers like you that remains the absolute highlight of my maintaining and continuing to create content for this channel, and I'm frankly entirely honored to have had the opportunity to share with you this interview today. So, with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. Or if you are already subscribed, you're always encouraged to share, as the more eyes there are on this content, the more potential new players we might draw to this game, and as a result, serve only to ever expand our Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through Twitter or through Facebook, and as ever, I'd be honored were you to contribute to my Patreon. But in any case, thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.